Hello, I'm Kendel St. John.
And I'm Lisa Holland.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share information about Discovering Me. We've been piloting this exciting project for the past few years, and the response from schools, parents, and stakeholders has been enthusiastic and positive. Stakeholders have found this person-centered transition assessment to be a valuable tool in building customized work-based learning experiences for students with greater support needs. Before I begin, let us tell you a little bit about our center. The Center on Transition Innovations is funded by the Virginia Department of Education and housed at Virginia Commonwealth University. At the center, we very much believe that the ultimate goal of all education is to enable students to be employed and live within their own communities. Therefore, all of our work is focused on how we can help youth while they are still receiving services through IDEA to build skills and prepare for work. Before we get into the details of Discovering Me, let's talk about the big picture. What are the current outcomes for people with disabilities? Take just a moment to think about your students or former students, or maybe even your own child. What will they be doing after high school if they aren't employed and not working? The picture isn't rosy. It's disappointing, quite frankly. The 2017 Annual Disabilities Continuum report only 35.9% of 18 to 64-year-olds with disabilities were employed, as compared to 76.8% of those without disabilities. We know people both with and without disabilities struggle when they don't have work or aren't consistent in their work habits. And they struggle with a variety of really unpleasant and disappointing outcomes, such as social isolation, living in poverty, unhealthy situations, and connections with the criminal justice system. Work is a vital aspect of living well in our society, and we want support for all people in reaching their capacity for competitive work in their communities.
In addition to the really disappointing adult outcomes for our folks with disabilities, there were several other kind of guiding principles or guiding issues that really led us at the Center on Transition Innovation to develop the Discovering Me tool. One of the first was we actually began a project here in Virginia through the work of Marc Gold and Associates and with Ellen Condon, working on discovery using those adult models that had been implemented through different organizations. And what we found was that the adult models often didn't work well or didn't translate well into working with youth. The adult models of discovery often only focus on customized employment. And actually, it was very difficult when we would walk into a middle school or even into a high school with a 9th grade student to go to a family and say, oh, we're going to start working and start talking about customized employment, when that family was really struggling with just how do we survive middle school or how do we make it through, the day. So we knew that there were a few things that we needed to change when we started developing the Discovering Me model. And one of those was our focus. In addition to long-term, we're thinking about customized employment and building toward employment. We're also looking through the Discovering Me tool of how do we build community integration, and how do we build skills that will translate into future employment. Another need that we saw, working again with students, with teachers, and with families, is that absolute need to focus on career development and transition planning early. Again, oftentimes in the adult model of discovery and customized employment, that process will not begin until that student's senior year, and in fact, sometimes the last 6 months of their senior year, or even after they've left school. We feel again that we're losing a great deal of valuable time that we could be working, to both build careers, and build skills for those young people. Kendel and I also oftentimes heard from many teachers, and actually again also from students and from family members who were frustrated and felt like they needed assessment tools that were appropriate for what we like to call our students who have the strongest or the greatest barriers to employment. Oftentimes these assessment tools, some teachers were spending hours and hours trying to administer these tests, and then they felt like the results that they were getting were not at all any way usable for them. So when we were thinking about what do we need to develop around Discovering Me, we knew that we needed an assessment that would actually yield results that could help build a coordinated set of activities and actually lead to true post-secondary outcomes. Another thing that really we saw working in the field so much was that we needed to start changing the narrative, if you will. Okay, in other words, in the field of special education, we spend so much time focusing on a student's disability, or in other words, what they can't do. And oftentimes that's true in the adult service world as well. In other words, they qualify for services based on their disability, not on their abilities. And yet if we all think about it as adults, we didn't build our careers on our disabilities. Mm-hmm. In other words, none of us thought, oh my gosh, I really am terrible at math, so I'm going to become an accountant. Instead, we looked at our own lives and we started thinking, what are our strengths and what are our talents? Okay, and how can we build those into something that we not only enjoy, but we can also make money off of or earn a living? We need to do the same thing for our students with disabilities. We need, very much so, to build on their strengths and to recognize them and to celebrate what gifts and talents that they bring. That may seem like a little thing, but oftentimes we see that as a huge thing. And one of the reasons we think that so many people really do like this program is because it gives a way to celebrate these young folks. Another thing that we knew that we really needed to try to help change that narrative is if we truly are, moving into that employment first philosophy or that true belief that everyone can work, then we really need to put our actions where our beliefs are there. In other words, we need to stop focusing so much on trying to answer that question, can or will this person work? And instead, focus on how can we support this young person, okay, to work as an adult. We need to, and in this program, again, what we do is we change from talking about customized employment, and instead we talk about customized work-based learning experiences. The other thing that we knew that we needed to do was that we needed to stop trying to fit kids into what we call existing programs. There are some models of employment out there that are absolutely wonderful, but too often we hear folks who say, oh, well, we just need that program. We really do need to start making models and programs that fit individual kids rather than trying to fit kids into existing models or programs.
So what is Discovering Me? It is a youth-focused, person-centered transition assessment intended to build those customized work-based learning experiences that Lisa just described. This acrostic that you see on the screen excuse me, provides an overview of the Discovering Me process and the main tenets of that program. We will discuss each of these in greater detail later in our webcast with a few student examples, but let's start with this overview first that's here on the acrostic. We start by determining the team. We want anyone who knows the student well to have a voice at the table. Most especially, that includes the student and their family. We follow the team meeting by interviewing those who know the student well who might not have been able to be at the team meeting and at the table. We survey the students' 21st century work skills and assess their strengths and support needs. And then we consider that foundation information that we've just developed that's in 4 areas: their strengths and interests, their conditions for success, their contributions, and their challenges to consider. The team then brainstorms and opens opportunities in the home, school, and community related to the student's foundation information. They then verify the opportunities that occur through observations in the home, school, and community. Students explore career clusters through a team discussion in meeting 3, and then the team reviews the progress of the opportunities developed by the team. And last but certainly not least, we celebrate the yielded outcomes. Now we'd like to give you a little bit of just a few details concerning the 3-meeting process. The 3-meeting process follows a structure of collecting, building, and exploring. In meeting 1, we're collecting information from the team. With meeting 2, we start building opportunities in the home, school, and community. And in meeting 3, the team explores career clusters and identifies some careers that might match the students' interests and strengths.
Let's look a little bit more closely at each one of these meetings. As we said, remember kind of our format is collect, build, and explore. In that first meeting, we're focusing on collecting information. Our main activities are to welcome, to provide a rationale of why we've all come together as a team, and to try to build that team and get team commitments to the process. We also in this meeting conduct a team interview / conversation. It's really where we're just trying to facilitate a discussion about this young person in order to collect information. And then lastly, at the end of that, then we identify who isn't at the table or who else knows a great deal about this young person who we need to collect more information from or who we need to also interview. And what are those additional sources of data that are already there that we just need to pull together as a team? The primary outcomes is that foundation information. And in terms of time, meeting 1, generally speaking, this is oftentimes the longest meeting. And we really do oftentimes feel it takes about 2 hours. As we mentioned, in this first team, we have that team interview or that team conversation. Again, as Kendel mentioned, the team itself is made up of those people who know the student well and or those people who may be important in that child's life, especially in the adult service world, in terms of providing some services for them. Kendel and I oftentimes laugh. We have what we call non-negotiables. A couple of the non-negotiables around our team meetings is that we never meet without the student. We never meet without the family, and we never meet without the school represented. Again, we feel like those are the foundations of that team and that each one has to be included in order for us to be successful. Our interview is broken into really 4 sections. The 4 sections include my family, my school experiences, my community experiences and friends, and my additional conditions for employment. Let's look at just a couple of these questions that we have with this team interview, and again, really conversation starters. All of these questions are really just opening questions, and then whoever is facilitating or who the team will ask more probing questions based on the responses that they're getting back from the members of the team. For example, one of the questions under this section of my family is, home is often the first place we learn about working and having responsibilities. Tell us about some of the things that your child does around the home to help himself or others. This could be as simple as making his or her bed or as complex as fixing meals for my entire family. Another example of a question under my additional considerations for employment is transportation can be one of the greatest barriers to employment for many people with and without disabilities. How far of a commute to employment do you think your child will be able to manage? How do you foresee your child getting to and from work? As you can see, many of these questions will be geared toward either the family or toward the school and always toward the student. We always want student input whenever we can. But again, we want to stress that these are just opening questions, okay, that need to be followed up in order for us to get that foundation information that we will need. A couple of the other things that we really wanted to stress about this first team meeting is that we've got to create that atmosphere where everyone feels comfortable. So we always say that it's no judgments. What we oftentimes find is when we start asking some of these questions, that families and teachers, whoever, almost have what we call aha moments. For example, when we start asking about, well, what are the responsibilities your child has within the home? What are the responsibilities that they have within their community? And when we keep hearing, oh, they don't have any, then oftentimes we'll have parents who say, oh, I know we got to do better, and we always say, no judgment, this isn't what we're about here. Mm-hmm. We want to honor everyone's input, and we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable when they're sharing within the group. We oftentimes have also been asked, why is it that we adopted a team approach rather than to collecting this information rather than an individual interview approach? And really there are a couple or maybe three major reasons why that was true. One is that we really do feel like by conducting this interview or this conversation, it really does help us to build a collaborative team. And a team is always going to be stronger than any of us individually. One of the things that we really do hear oftentimes, at least from teachers, is, especially when we're talking about transition, is, oh my God, I feel like I'm doing this alone. We oftentimes hear that from parents as well. I feel like I'm in this alone. And we really want to build that collaborative team. We want people to get out of their silos, if you will, okay, and learn how to collaborate with each other for the good of that one student, okay? We also wanted to use it is because we really think that it's a much better way of sharing information. When everybody's at the table and everybody's hearing it, at the same time. We've had a lot of examples of where, maybe we're sitting in a team meeting and the parent will be talking about how they have to, just cut up food, for their child and give them so much assistance at home, in terms of eating. And you can kind of see the school, and then when the school starts sharing about that same experience, they'll say, oh, well, they're eating independently here at school. All we're doing is helping them with their tray, and, we get to see the child in different environments through different lenses. So we really feel like that's valuable. We also believe that in many ways conducting the interviews or the conversations as teams rather than individuals is really in the long run saving a lot of time for a lot of the members. We feel like we have better teams, less time intensive, and with really better collaboration outcomes in the end by using this team approach. At the end, after we've conducted that team interview, that team discussion, and after we've collected all of that other information from other sources, then we build what's called our foundation information. And I can tell you that Kendel and I are both what sometimes people refer to us as the queens of one-pagers. Again, this was another example of sometimes where adult models don't always translate well into the school system and things of this nature. So one of the things we wanted to do was we wanted to provide a framework for us to share information, the most pertinent information, in a quick and easy way. Not that, a 10-page report. And again, we take notes all during that team meeting and during that conversation. So we have all of that, but we found that we really needed to put it into a format that was easy for teams to use. So we're really collecting 4 types of information. Again, one is the strengths and contributions, okay? Again, why do we focus on strengths? Because all of us build our own careers on strengths, not on weaknesses. We also really focus on what are the contributions that this young person can make. Again, when we talk about paradigm shifts, we spend so much time always talking about how can we help this young person, how can we help our children, and we don't spend enough time talking about how can that young person or how can that child contribute or help others. And that's a really significant shift in thinking. It helps us when we shift, when we stop thinking about what do we do for them and what do they do for us instead, okay, then we start seeing competency and we start having higher expectations. Another big type of information that we collect is interest that we've shown. Again, why? Oftentimes we build our careers and we build our activities within our community based on our interest. So again, for example, and this is one of the ways, again, that I really do feel like we're just a little bit different from the adult models. We are focused on future talking about employment, but another big thing that we're focusing on with this particular project is community integration. Mm-hmm. If I have a young person who's telling me that they have a great interest in art, then, you know, when we go to start building those opportunities, I want to look for how can we find other people, peers, other people within their community who also have that shared interest in art. How can we build opportunities with those people who share those same interests? It's the same thing we do as adults.
Sure.
Okay? We just don't always think to do it for our kids with disabilities. A third portion of the information is my conditions for success. Again, this is where we really do start thinking about, okay, how do we build opportunities, okay, or what has been proven most successful with this young person in the past? How do we capitalize on what works for them and what doesn't work for them? Under this is really where we start to learn how to build accommodations, okay, and supports that the student may need to be successful in activities. The fourth piece of information that we collect is challenges to consider. And just as I think it's wrong to focus too much on the disability, it's also just as wrong to not focus or to not recognize challenges that this young person may experience. Again, we're only setting up the child for success if we're trying to build opportunities. Mm-hmm. If we don't take those challenges into consideration. I'll give you an example, though, of what we say oftentimes to our teams when we use this and why we really do use this one page. By the way, this one page does have a back and front, so we do cheat just a little bit. But what we tell our teams is, look at the top half of the information. In other words, the strengths, the contributions that they're already making, and the interest that they've shown. Okay, how do we build or brainstorm opportunities based on those? But then also honor and consider that bottom half of the information, the conditions for success and the challenges to consider. Give you an example, okay? I was working with a young lady middle school, okay, who really did have a strong interest, okay, in working somehow with animals. How many times have you heard that? But really wanted to be a vet assistant and had a lot of strengths and already were making a lot of contributions that would really support her, you know, working in that field. So when the team started brainstorming, one of the things that we thought about within her community was, oh, let's have her do a kind of an entrepreneurial or a dog walking service within her community and offer that, you know, to her neighbors. It met many of her strengths. It met many of the contributions. It definitely met her interest. But then when we thought about her challenges, she had a physical disability that made it really difficult for her to walk any distances. So we knew that while that was a possibility, it really wasn't a successful possibility. So we had to change gears and look at other things. That's kind of what we're doing in meeting 1. Kendel, you want to talk about meeting 2?
Sure. So as we said before, in meeting 2, this is the building portion, where we're going to build those opportunities in the homeschool and community. This is the crux of what we're developing. As Lisa said before, we like to use those strengths, contributions, and interests to build those work-based learning opportunities in the homeschool and community. And we know that we're going to continue building on those initial opportunities as the student moves through middle school and high school and post-secondary education, hopefully moving them towards something that's related to those initial interests as they move towards a career. So this is the meat of what we're doing during this process. We have two main activities that we're going to conduct during meeting number 2. The first is an informal assessment of workplace readiness skills through a team discussion. We're still using that team discussion because we like the team and we want everybody's input. The second activity we're going to do during this meeting is we're going to use that foundation information that we collected during meeting number 1, and we're going to start to use that information to build those customized work-based learning opportunities. The outcomes are those activities and opportunities. That's what we want to come out of meeting 2 with. This is going to take a little less time, approximately 1 to 2 hours, but still within the realm of reasonable, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So that workplace readiness skills assessment that I talked about previously is actually based on this workplace readiness skills for the Commonwealth pictogram that you see in front of you, that you're looking at. It covers a wide range of skill sets that are portrayed in the infographic. And this was actually developed, these ideas and these skills and sets of skill sets were actually developed by Virginia employers several years ago. They were surveyed and they were asked, what skills do you want all of your employees to have, whether they're the lowest paid part-time worker or if they're the CEO of the company? What skills do you want them to have? So this was developed, the infogram was developed based on the survey results from the employers. And then Lisa and I sort of pulled from that and thought, well, how can we adapt that for use with middle school students or early high school students? What are the skills that we'd like to say they might possess at that age, that younger age, knowing full well that they're not going to have all of those skills. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that any of us have all of these skills, but we're working towards it. They cover those behaviors that we might traditionally think of as pre-vocational sorts of skills. Anything from being on time to workplace attire, but they also look really at things that are more 21st century. Safe internet use and technology that certainly we weren't thinking about 40 years ago. That's also captured here. But let me give you an example of how we've adapted the informal assessment to capture what a middle schooler might know. One of the categories, and it's there in the middle under professional knowledge and skills, is customer service. So when we start talking to a 13-year-old about their customer service skills, a lot of times we'll give them an example. And the example we give is, if a guest came into your school building, and could you meet them at the office where they sign in the morning or whatever time they're coming to visit, and take them back to your classroom? Is that something that you could do? Most of the time, I think that the team is easily able to answer, yes, they would be able to do that. They either have the route founding or they have just the people skills to be able to greet someone and take them to their classroom. But that's an example of how we've adapted this form to something that makes sense to middle school students. And like I said, while we know that they won't have all of these skills, and when they're 14 or 13 or maybe even 20, we know that by starting in the middle school level or early high school level, that they're going to have lots of years, especially as they're going out into the community with those opportunities in the homeschool and community. They're going to have lots of years to be able to practice these, and also to be able to embed these skills into goals, whether those are IEP goals or whether they're personal goals or whether they're just part of what's being assessed in those opportunities. So here's the form that we used during that meeting number 2 when we're building those opportunities in the home, school, and community. And you can see that we've got 3 columns right there: opportunities in the home, opportunities in the community, and opportunities in the school. This is where the team works together to determine what skills and interests does the student currently possess, and what might they want to experience out in the community or in their home at school to be able to really start to make some connections between my interests and my skills and my contributions, and how might those be applied to real life situations. And the teams that we've worked with have come up with some, I think, just really creative and inventive ways of having the students get some experience in those skill areas. This form has your basic information, the who, the what, and the where of those opportunities, and a timeline as well, because we're special ed teachers. We like to have all the pertinent information in one spot that people can go back to. But Lisa, I think you were going to share an example of how we've used this form and some of the opportunities that
Sure.
have been developed.
We were working with one young lady delightful young lady. One of her special interests was in hair, and everyone always described her as a girly girl. Yeah. Everything, anything that was primping, girly, that she really did love. And again, I think Kendel may have already said this, but I'm not sure. This is one of our non-negotiables too, is that a team has to build opportunities in each one of these areas. It can't be all in the home, it can't be all in the community, it can't be all in the school. No. It's shared responsibilities. So with this young lady who was the girly girl and loved, doing hair and makeup and all that kind of stuff, when we started thinking about what were some opportunities that we could build for her in the community, then we actually built where her grandmother she was going to job shadow her grandmother, who worked in a retirement community, doing the lady's hair who lived in that retirement community. So, one of the other things that was really great, in addition to being a girly girl and loving the hair and, wanting to do that job shadowing and stuff, she also loved to talk to people. Oh my goodness, so personable. So we thought that would be a perfect match for her to work there. Another young man that I worked with, he had what a lot of the team called an obsession, if you will, with electronics. In other words, one of the things that was always noted was he would always check everybody's electronics, your cell phone, your iPad, your laptop, anything like that. And if it was ever below 50%, then he was going to make sure that he immediately went, and got it charged up. That was just, one of his great passions, was that type of thing. So we started thinking about how can we use that gift and that talent within the school and that interest in computers. He had an interest in technology, So we built an opportunity for him to work in the school in the mornings, It was about a 10-minute experience, and again, we really want to stress that, especially with middle schoolers. We're not talking about a kid going out and working 2 hours somewhere or anything of that nature. These experiences are going to be short. And what we want to do is we want to build short ones and build from there. In other words, they have to have definite beginning, middle, and end. Generally speaking, we're talking, oftentimes we suggest about a 10 to 15-minute experience. But this young man, he would go into the computer labs of the school. We had him help the computer person, by turning on all the computers and getting everything set up for the day. Very quickly, we learned that he was a whole lot better at this than we had anticipated, He started doing double, 2 computers at a time, and he was actually so successful that by the time we met in the third meeting, then the computer person for that school had asked if we could expand his duties because he was just being so successful. So, 2 examples.
Yeah, those are great examples, and I just want to add one more. And I'd like to share an example of a team that I felt really worked outside of the box. It was they were working with a student, a delightful young man with a lot of strengths and lots of ways that he could contribute. And one of his areas of interest, a very strong area of interest of his, was weather. And he could tell you anything about the weather using technical terms. And I think coming into that first meeting, I don't think the team really recognized what a strength that was for him. Just his ability to be able to take in that amount of information and share it was rather amazing. So the team came up with an opportunity for him in the homeschool and community, each of those are 3 areas, on how he could continue to develop that skill that he already had for weather. So in the morning at school, he would come in and he would give a weather update. at this particular school, they had students who were interested in the weather and were going to need to be getting ready for the weather. And so he would give a weather update, and he would do that day's weather, but also sort of a weather forecast for the next day so that they could prepare. His parents were also going to help him find out how he might be able to become a weather watcher for the local radio or TV station. In our area and where this school was, there were lots of weather watchers that would call in with the local weather. So he was going to find out how he could become a weather watcher. And then in his community, he was going to contact his favorite weather forecaster from the local TV station and invite them to come to the school. And then he was going to be the ambassador when that guest came to the school and show them to the classroom, and then also ask them as part of his opportunity what sort of opportunities there are in the community for somebody interested in the weather to volunteer. So these are just a few examples of how this process has been applied, but I'm sure you're already thinking of students that you'd like to work with this and to build some opportunities with them.
Sorry, thanks. All right, so now we've built our foundation information and we've built also our opportunities, okay? The third meeting, we're really focusing on exploring career clusters. In this third meeting, we always review the opportunity progress. Why? Because those things that do not get reviewed oftentimes also don't get done is one reason. The other reason is because we always tell people that foundation information is really a living and breathing document. In other words, we should be gathering data and information about the student in those opportunities and then using that as part of our foundation information. We also introduce career clusters and we identify student interest, and then also we narrow down those choices to the top 3 choices based on foundation information. Our primary outcome is a document, okay, in which we have identified the top 3 career clusters and we've aligned it with that foundation information. Again, approximately 1 to 2 hours for meeting time. You can see the flyer here. This is the flyer that Kendel and I often use to kind of introduce young people to the 16 career clusters. You'll find something very similar to this in every state, especially through your career technology education department. Again, sometimes people ask us why we consider this an important part of the process, introducing them to the 16 career clusters. And we have, through experience, oftentimes found that people with disabilities oftentimes are stereotyped or pigeonholed into careers when we don't explore all 16 careers, especially around food, filth, etc. So we really did need to help our teams to think more broadly, and introducing them to the 16 career clusters really does help this team to brainstorm extremely well. Especially if we're working with 7th or 8th graders, even early high school kids, we don't expect our kids to know, really what their career is going to be for the rest of their life. Many of them have never even heard of these careers. Okay, but we always have to have some place to begin. Too often when in IEP meetings, when people say, what do you want to do as a job? What do you want to do as a career? Then kids will tend to give back either careers such as, I want to be a professional football player or a professional basketball player, or I want to work with animals, or they'll maybe sometimes give back jobs or careers that they know from their family, but they really have never had an opportunity to really explore all of those different careers. And so we really do feel like this is important to help them to do that. In this process, we introduce them to all of these. We show examples of what are some of the different jobs and careers in each one of them, okay? And then we simply ask the young person, and as well as the team, okay, kind of what's your gut or initial reaction to this? Could you see yourself ever working, okay, in this field? We always say that having a young person who says none of these will work is just as bad as having a kid who says all 16 of them will work. Okay, so really what we're looking for are some visceral almost reactions to some of these. In other words, what do we really think? We'd like to say, generally speaking, I'd say we're pretty happy if we get at least 5 or 6, maybe areas of interest. For some kids, though, their horizons aren't that broad, okay? But again, what we do with this is we review all 16, and then we begin that process of narrowing it down, okay? And we always narrow it down at the end to the top 3 career clusters. What we do is after we get, let's say that we've identified about 5 or 6, okay, different careers from the 16 that we're interested in, then we ask the team to break off in groups of no more than 2. So usually we have a team of the family, a team of the school folks, a team of the agency folks, a team of some of those support, folks, et cetera, whatever, okay? And we ask them, using that foundation information, okay, you all decide as a team of 2 people, okay, 2 or 3, okay, what do you think would be the best 3 matches for that individual student? We do that for a couple of different reasons. One of them, again, is to help, again, see different possibilities. If we just ask that young person or that family, they may not see as many possibilities as the other members of the team. Again, I'll tell you a quick story. A young person that I was working with, very significant disabilities, great barriers to employment. If we would have asked, what do you see that young person, what career do you see that young person working in, or what field do you see them working in when they become an adult? Almost with 100% certainty, I can tell you that almost all of the team members would have said one of 2 things. Either I never see him being a person who will be employed, or I only see him working in one of those traditional food fields, et cetera. Okay? After we had done this process, then the team, between all the different groups, identified 13 different possibilities for this young person.
Wow.
The parents were just overwhelmed at how that team, those people who worked with him, now were seeing all kinds of possibilities, okay, instead of barriers for him. What we do, though, once we get the top 3, okay, is we identify some possible jobs, okay, or interest in this career cluster. For some kids, we may be actually listing true jobs. For other kids, we know that it will be customized jobs. So we, do it based on that individual student. If it's a true job rather than a customized job, and I don't mean a true job, that's kind of a bad thing to say, but a more traditional job like being a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher, okay, then with those students we also talk about what is the education most typical for this type of job. One of the reasons why we do that is because we know through working through experience, we've had a whole lot of kids who say, I want to be a doctor, I want to make all that good money, and stuff like that. And then they don't realize the amount of education that it will take them. And that has to be a part of the conversation very early. But then the other really important thing that we do is we really do, as a team, we say, okay, if we're looking at a customized job, for example, in this career cluster, then what do we know from that foundation information, okay, from that top half of that information on that page that will support this child or this student working in that job or in that career cluster? We also list what are some of those challenges or what are some of those conditions for success. In other words, what are some of those accommodations or what are some of the barriers that young person is going to have to overcome in order to be successful in that job or career cluster. So we are really, what we're doing here is we're modeling for this team how we approach thinking about careers, okay? Because we know that today that young person may be interested in animals, tomorrow it may be a totally different career cluster, and we at least want to model for them a way to think about it, so when their interests change, okay, then they have a way of thinking about it to accommodate those changes. That's the 3 meetings, okay? Real quickly, with a little bit of time that we have left, is we just wanted to share with you guys some of what we feel like are some of the benefits of Discovering Me. Of course, we're a little biased because we've been working with it and things of this nature, but we really do feel like one of the benefits is that the time commitment is reasonable for all parties. Again, this is a person-centered planning tool, and oftentimes they are very time-intensive. What we have tried to do is we've tried to develop it where it feels reasonable for all parties, and we really do feel like we've done that. Another biggie related to that is it's no cost for this assessment.
Right.
What a win-win for school districts, for everybody involved. It's not a program that you have to buy, or you don't have to have, all sorts of expensive technology, to implement it or anything of that nature. But instead, it's free, and who doesn't love free? Another benefit is it gives families and teachers, especially, and students, a voice and a way to have conversations early about transition. While again, I think we noted earlier, especially for families, sometimes they're just trying to survive the day. And they're just trying to get their kid from 7th grade to 8th grade. And then of course the dreaded, middle school to high school, and things of this nature. And so their focus is oftentimes about that and not about what's longer term. And yet, in order to be successful, they've got to start having those conversations early. Again, one of the things that we keep hearing over and over again is those aha moments, and those families especially who will come back to us and say, you know what, we started giving him a little bit more responsibilities at home as part of, that building opportunities, and he's just beginning to thrive. It was our fault, or it was one of the things that we just needed to change about how we work in our family, is to try to help them be more independent and to see this earlier and to see how really the benefits of discovering me are immediate as well as long-term, okay? Some of the things, again, we can tell you a lot of stories about individual students and their individual benefits, but some of the bigger picture almost benefits is many of the students that we see, schools are reporting a decrease in behavior problems, if that was an issue beforehand, an increase in school attendance. We're actually seeing that the parents and the students especially have a much more positive view of what their future will look like, and to give that positive view is a real gift to families. We also see generally that many of the teachers who we're working with begin to think a little bit more globally. This makes sense for a lot of kids. How can we build opportunities for more and more kids? And the results sometimes of that actually have been in some of the schools that we've been working with, is where they will begin to enact student-led enterprises. So they're giving authentic work experiences within the school to more kids than just those kids that we have as a focus here. Kendel, you want to tell us about a few more benefits?
Sure. One that we've somewhat mentioned before, and talked about getting parents and students and agencies and families out of those silos, is it invites families, agencies, and schools into a true collaborative partnership. When you're at the table and you're having that kind of conversation and discussion, I think it really lends itself to collaboration, and a collaboration that we don't always see in those formal settings like IEP meetings, where so much of it is focused on the legal document. This is far more casual, and it really allows for, I think, a true collaboration between all of the stakeholders. Just from a really practical standpoint, it's user-friendly forms and a structure that helps coordinate the IEPs. These are forms that can easily be dropped into your IEP programs if you would like to do that and have them as part of that more formal IEP structure. But then the one that I really think is probably the one that hits closest to my heart is that it empowers students to self-direction. And I just want to give one more student example. A young lady we were working with a couple of years ago when we were still working some with high school students. She was in her last year of school, and when we met at her first meeting, she really didn't have a lot of direction. And she was less than 6 months from graduating from high school and wasn't really sure. She was sort of scattered on her interests and her strengths. Through the meeting process, the 3-meeting process, we really started to see her hone in on certain skills that she wanted to make sure that she was going to be able to use in a career as an adult. And by meeting number 3, we really started to see a laser focus with her on what she wanted to do. And really, her life dream was to become an advocate for other students like her. And I really found that one empowering to hear about, but also just amazing to see that growth in her over a 3-meeting process.
And one that we're sure that she's going to be able to accomplish.
Yes, I think you're right. So, thank you for joining us today to find out more about Discovering Me. We hope you've been inspired to want to bring this process to your school and to work with students that you know on helping them develop those customized work-based learning experiences in their home school and community. If you have any additional questions, you're certainly welcome to contact Lisa or myself, or our director is Elizabeth Getzel. Or there's also going to be a web board that will be posted following this webcast, and you can post questions to that if you'd like. Thanks.
Thank you.